Have you ever wondered what really happens behind the scenes in the church? What if I told you that there are secrets so dark that, if revealed, they could shake the faith of millions? Today, I'm going to share something that challenges everything you've ever heard about the sanctity of altars. In my last report, I revealed forbidden secrets of the Vatican, but what I discovered next was even scarier. We're not just talking about old stories or unsubstantiated rumors. We are talking about evidence, records, documents, evidence that point to something unimaginable, a dark pact within the church itself. The truth has always been hidden, buried under centuries of tradition and silence. But I, Father Thomas Berry, cannot ignore what I saw. What I discovered could forever change the way we see the institution that should be the pillar of faith and light. But what if, within these sacred walls, something dark had also found a home? It all started when, by chance, or perhaps by improvidence, my hands touched an old document hidden in a secret compartment behind an old confessional. The moment my eyes swept over those words written in Latin, a shiver ran down my spine. The names mentioned there, the dates, the rituals described. Would it be possible that high-ranking members were involved in a pact that contradicts everything the church preaches? A pact that mixes power, influence, and something even more disturbing? If this were true, the consequences would be devastating. But the most terrifying thing was yet to come. After that discovery, something changed. People around me started acting strangely, suspicious looks. Whispers interrupted when they noticed my presence. And then, a warning reached me. Father Berry, there are things that should not be investigated. What should I do? Close your eyes like so many before me, pretend nothing happened, and continue with my mission as a priest, or risk everything and bring this truth to light? The answer to this question is not simple, and that's why I need your opinion. What would you do in my place? Do you believe that certain secrets should remain hidden to protect the faith of the faithful? Or must the truth be revealed, whatever the cost? Leave your comment below and tell me, do you think the church really keeps dark pacts, or is it all just a conspiracy theory? What if I told you that what I've discovered is just the tip of the iceberg? Would you be ready to hear what comes next? I thought I'd seen it all, until I found that manuscript hidden behind an old confessional. It was a silent night, one of those where the darkness itself seems to whisper ancient secrets. The church was empty. The smell of incense still permeated the air, mixing with the woody scent of the aged wooden pews. I wasn't looking for anything, at least not consciously, but something guided me there, as if that discovery needed to be made, as if that secret was just waiting to be found. The confessional was old, from a time when the church still had secrets that should never be revealed. Over time, the wood gave way, and it was in one of these fragile spots that I noticed something strange. My fingers slipped through a barely noticeable crack, and a soft crack filled the silence of the church. Something moved. My heart quickened, and for a moment I hesitated. What was I about to discover? Slowly I pulled the panel loose, and inside, among layers of dust and oblivion, I found a package of aged papers, yellowed with time. When I opened them, I immediately realized that these were no ordinary church documents. The elaborate Latin, the strange symbols drawn in the margins, the names, those names. Men of faith, figures who had walked the corridors of the Vatican, bishops and cardinals who, over the centuries, had left their mark on the history of the church. But what really gave me goosebumps were not the names, but the words written in an almost ritualistic tone, like a silent alliance. Sealed by time. The phrases hinted at a pact, an agreement made not for the glory of God, but for something I still didn't fully understand. Words like sacrifice, renewal, and perpetual oath were repeated throughout the pages, always accompanied by strange symbols, some familiar, others completely unfamiliar to me. There was mention of an inner circle, something that, until that moment, I believed was just a myth whispered among more curious seminarians. I didn't know what to think. My First impulse was to seek explanations, to try to convince myself that those documents meant nothing. But I knew I was lying to myself. This wasn't a hoax. That wasn't a mistake. I held in my hands proof of something that should never have come to light. And it was at that moment that I felt the presence. I didn't hear footsteps, there were no whispers, but my entire body reacted as if someone was there, watching. A chill ran down my spine, and for the first time in years, I felt fear inside the house of God. I was not alone. My breathing became heavy. The air around me felt different, charged with something that did not belong to the sanctity of this place. But I couldn't be intimidated. With shaking hands, I continued leafing through the aged pages, trying to absorb every detail, every word, every symbol drawn with an almost obsessive precision. The names were there, written in careful handwriting, as if each one of them carried a weight that could not be forgotten. There were bishops, cardinals, and even a pope or two, men who publicly had been defenders of the faith, figures who represented the highest authority of the church. But there, in that document, they were connected by something very different. The first lines were already disturbing. They were talking about a pact, a commitment sealed not just with words, but with specific rituals. The language used was ambiguous, but clear enough for anyone who knew how to read between the lines. It made mention of an ancient alliance, a secret society that had operated within the halls of the Vatican for centuries. There were symbols everywhere. Some were familiar: inverted crosses, all-seeing eyes, intertwined serpents, but others were completely foreign to me. Among the most enigmatic symbols, one of them was repeated several times, a circle with a key in the center, surrounded by something that looked like a veil. It was as if it represented a secret under lock and key, something that could only be accessed by those who were initiated into the pact. The words "perpetual oath" appeared frequently, followed by references to meetings held in specific locations, always on moonless nights, away from the eyes of the faithful. There were rituals described, ceremonies that were not part of any known Christian doctrine. Some passages mentioned offerings, symbolic sacrifices, acts of devotion that seemed to completely distort the teachings of Christ. But it was one section in particular that made my blood run cold. He was talking about the veiled light, something that should remain hidden until the time was right. The veiled light guides us, as not everything should be seen by impure eyes. True power lies in the darkness that sustains faith. My stomach turned. That was heresy, a monstrous deviation from the path I had sworn to follow. But the signatures at the end of the document left no room for doubt. They were real. Some names I recognized immediately, prominent figures, leaders who had been revered by the church. Others were less known, but they were there, linked by this silent pact that spanned centuries. One thing was clear: this was not just any sect. This was not a fringe group operating in the shadows. It was something much bigger, something that was ingrained in the structure of the church itself. And I, Father Thomas Berry, had just become a threat to them. My mind was buzzing with questions. Since when did this exist? How could such a dark pact have remained, hidden for so long? What was the true purpose of this secret society? But before I could find those answers, an even more terrible feeling came over me. I was not alone in that church. Someone was watching me, and that someone knew that I had found what should never have been discovered. My heart hammered against my chest. That document, those words, those names. I wanted to believe that everything was just an illusion, a trick played by my tired mind. But it was real. I was faced with something that should not exist within the church, something that contradicted everything I had learned since entering the priesthood. My vision blurred for a moment, and a bitter taste rose to my mouth. How was this possible? How could something so dark be rooted within the very institution that was supposed to be the bastion of light? I felt like I had been betrayed. From the first day I donned the cassock, I was taught to believe that the church was the foundation of truth, the path to salvation. But now, Faced with the words engraved on those ancient pages, I felt like I was being pulled into an abyss of doubt that threatened to swallow my faith completely. The dilemma gnawed at my soul. If I reported what I discovered, what would happen to me? I already knew the answer. This pact, this secret society, had existed for centuries. They had power, influence, control over things I couldn't even imagine. Anyone who dared to challenge this hidden order would be treated as a problem, to be eliminated. But if I remained silent, if I pretended that none of that had come to my attention, if I went on with my life as if I had never seen those pages, then I would be an accomplice. I would become part of the conspiracy. I would protect those who, hidden beneath sacred robes, manipulated faith for purposes I could not yet fully understand. My hands were shaking. Cold sweat ran down the back of my neck. I felt a tightness in my chest, a crushing weight on my shoulders. As a priest, I had taken an oath to defend the truth, to guide the faithful along the correct path. But how could I continue to preach about light and redemption, knowing that dark forces were hiding behind the altars? I thought about going to a trusted bishop, someone who could help me interpret those words and understand the dimension of what I had found. But I soon discarded that idea. What if he was part of it? If this pact was infiltrated in the highest echelons of the church, there was no one I could trust. The loneliness of that moment was overwhelming. I've never felt so isolated. My entire world was crumbling before me, and I didn't know what to do. Fear crawled through my body like poison, mixing with the horror of realizing that no matter what choice I made, there was no escape. The silence of the church weighed on me like a judgment. Whatever was hiding inside knew that I had discovered the truth, and now there was no turning back. I needed answers. The weight of those pages was crushing my conscience, and I couldn't carry the burden alone. But who to turn to? Within the church itself, I no longer knew who to trust. The pact mentioned in that manuscript was not the work of a small, isolated group. It was something old, deep, rooted in the corridors of power, and I was sure that if I tried to talk to the wrong people, I might disappear without a trace. It was then that I remembered Father Augustine, an elderly man with tired eyes and a calm voice. He had lived as a recluse for years, isolated in a small parish on the outskirts of Rome. Many considered him eccentric. Others believed he had been removed for being a problematic priest. But the few who really knew him said he knew too much. I made the decision to look for him before fear paralyzed me for good. The journey to his parish was long and silent. The entire journey, my mind was buzzing with questions that I feared would never have answers. What did that pact really mean? How far did the influence of this secret society go? And most importantly, what were they hiding? When I arrived at the church where Father Augustine lived, I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was a simple, small place, almost forgotten by time. I entered slowly and found him kneeling before the altar, praying with a devotion that seemed to surpass any human limit. I waited patiently until he finished, but before I could even say anything, he turned to me, his eyes sharp, as if he already knew the reason for my visit. "You found something you shouldn't have, didn't you?" My throat dried up. I hadn't said anything, and yet he knew. "Father Augustine, I need to understand something." He sighed deeply and motioned for me to follow him to a small room at the back of the church. He sat down on a worn wooden chair and watched me with a look filled with something I couldn't quite identify. Fear? Sadness? Resignation? "Tell me what you found," he asked. I opened my bag and took out the documents, placing them on the table between us. His eyes scanned the ancient words, and with each line his expression grew darker. When he finally finished, he closed his eyes and muttered something in Latin. "So it's true. They still exist." My heart raced. "Who are they?" I asked, my voice more urgent than I intended. Father Augustine rubbed his face with shaking hands before answering. "This order, this pact, has existed for centuries, Father Barry. They did not begin now, nor did they end with those who signed these pages. They have infiltrated the church since ancient times. They operate in the shadows, protected by the very power that the church has accumulated over the centuries. They are those who understand that true strength is not in faith, but in what can be done through it. My hands tightened on the arms of the chair. But what does that mean? What do they do? Father Augustine stared at me for a long moment, as if he was deciding whether or not to tell me the truth. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. What do? They control, they manipulate, they determine the course of history and decide who rises and who falls within the church. And they do all this without anyone ever noticing. I felt an invisible weight settle on my shoulders. But what about these rituals, those mentions of sacrifices? His gaze became even darker. There are things that the church would never admit. There are truths that, if revealed, would shake the faith of millions. Some of these practices date back to time immemorial. There were times when certain sacrifices were justified as part of a greater order. My skin crawled. Human sacrifices? Father Augustine looked away. Not always human, but always something of great value. Something that in some way could strengthen those at the top. I felt my breathing getting heavy. And why hasn't anyone ever reported it? He let out a humorless laugh. Many have tried, and they disappeared. Others were discredited. Some just went crazy. A dense silence hovered between us. For the first time since discovering those documents, I felt that perhaps I was dealing with something much bigger than I imagined. Father Augustine leaned forward and held my hand. Listen to me, Father Berry. Now that you know this, your life will never be the same. My mind was spinning. I wanted to believe this was just a conspiracy theory, but the documents were there. The names, the rituals, the evidence. And now, the words of a man who clearly knew much more than he was willing to say. What should I do? My voice was lower than I wanted. Father Augustine looked at me with a mixture of pity and gravity. You already made the decision by coming here? Suddenly, a noise echoed outside. A dry crack, followed by absolute silence. I turned around immediately, feeling a chill run down my spine. We are being watched, Father Augustine whispered. My mouth went dry. Do they know I'm here? They know everything. They always knew. My eyes fixed on the door of the small church. Outside, I knew something or someone was waiting. Before continuing this story, tell me, are you as scared as I am? If yes, press the button like right now so I know I'm not alone on this journey. Like this video if you want me to go even deeper into this investigation. If these revelations have left you intrigued, if you believe there is much more hidden in the shadows of the church, like now and help me keep going. The dry crack still echoed in my mind as I slowly backed away from the table, trying not to show the fear that burned in my chest. Father Augustine's gaze was fixed on the door, his old eyes filled with a dark understanding that I did not yet possess. If they know I'm here, then I'm already taken, I whispered, feeling my throat dry. You don't understand, Father Berry. You have crossed a line that should never have been crossed. Now your every step will be watched. Augustine's warning rang in my mind as I left his parish that night. The weight of knowledge was overwhelming, but the need to understand what was behind that dark pact was even greater. I knew I couldn't just go back to my routine and pretend nothing had happened. Something inside me demanded answers, and I was willing to find them, no matter what. I returned to my accommodation inside the church with a feeling of constant restlessness. Every shadow seemed to hide a spy. Every lingering glance from the clergy brothers made me wonder if they already knew I was starting to dig too deep, but I couldn't back down now. I started searching in the church's own archives. During the early hours, under the absolute silence of the ancient walls, I browsed through ancient records, forgotten documents that rarely saw the light of day. It was hard work, as many papers had been carefully catalogued to appear harmless. But some references were repeated, subtle clues hidden between the lines. The name Inner Circle appeared in scattered reports, never explicitly, but always linked to crucial decisions within the church structure. movements of cardinals, strangely altered financial records, orders for the sudden removal of certain priests who questioned too much. Nothing was written clearly, but the connections were there, like a macabre puzzle waiting to be put together. It was then that I found something that made my blood run cold. A record from 1871, hidden among administrative documents. It was an account of a young priest who, like me, had encountered something he shouldn't have. His name was Lorenzo Vitelli, and his denunciation was hushed up before it even reached the Pope. His last entry read, "I discovered the truth. I know they are watching me. If something happens to me, know that the church keeps a secret that should never have existed. God, forgive me for what I'm about to do." After this note, there was nothing more. No mention of Father Lorenzo, no record of his presence after that date. As if he had been erased from history, I swallowed hard. Father Lorenzo was not the first, and I feared he would not have been the last. My investigation could not stop there. I knew I couldn't trust official records, so I decided to look for those who had been removed from the church, priests who, for some reason, had been silenced. That's how I found Father Samuel. He lived isolated in a small mountain village, a man embittered by time and the weight of a past he refused to remember. Convincing him to talk was not easy. At first he avoided any conversation about the church, but when I mentioned the inner circle, I saw dread wash over his face. "Why are you asking about this?" he murmured, his voice almost a whisper. "Because I found proof. I know they exist. I know they operate in the shadows, manipulating everything within the church. I need to understand." The old priest closed his eyes as if gathering courage for something he had sworn never to revisit. Then he started talking. "When I entered the priesthood, I was naive. I believed that the church was the house of truth, of redemption. But then one day I saw something I shouldn't have seen." He paused, hands shaking tightly, holding the cup of tea in front of him. It was a ceremony, a secret ceremony. It was no ordinary mass. They were gathered, bishops, cardinals, men of power, but there were no prayers to God. His name was not even mentioned. Instead, there were chants in a language I didn't understand. There were symbols carved into the floor of the cathedral, symbols that belonged to nothing I had ever seen. I felt a shiver run up my spine with each word. "What happened next?" I asked, my voice thick with tension. Father Samuel laughed bitterly. "I was expelled. They accused me of heresy. They said I was questioning the doctrine of the church. But the truth is, I knew too much. They couldn't allow someone like me to speak. And these rituals, do you know what they are for?" He was silent for a long moment before responding. "Everything revolves around power, my son. People's faith is the most valuable currency there is. When someone has the power to control it, they have absolute power." I felt my heart speed up. "Do you believe these rituals still happen?" His eyes fixed on mine, filled with a frightening certainty. "I don't think so. I know." The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Now I had more than just suspicions. I had testimony, records, and fragmentary evidence that, when put together, painted a terrible picture. But that still wasn't enough. I needed something more concrete, something that was impossible to deny. The only way to prove the existence of the inner circle was to infiltrate where no one had ever dared to enter. I would have to witness one of these rituals with my own eyes, and that's exactly what I was about to do. The piercing night wind seemed to carry with it a silent warning. The way back, after the conversation with Father Samuel, seemed longer, darker. I felt like something was different, like an invisible presence followed my every step. My senses were heightened, my breathing was rhythmic, and the feeling that I was being watched grew by the minute. The village's narrow streets were deserted. Streetlights flickered, casting distorted shadows against the stone walls of ancient buildings. It was as if everything around me was trying to warn me to turn around, to abandon this investigation while there was still time. But I already knew. It was too late for that. It was then that I realized As I turned a corner, I saw a figure standing at the end of the street. A man in a dark overcoat with his face partially covered by the brim of his hat. He didn't move. He just stood there, motionless, as if he was waiting for me. My entire body tensed. Instinct told me to keep walking, pretend I didn't notice his presence. But my heart said something else. The man slowly raised his head, revealing only a pair of deep-set eyes, shadowed by the faint glow of the streetlight. A shiver ran up my spine. He didn't say anything. There was no need. His mere presence there was a warning in itself. I quickened my steps, trying to control the fear that threatened to take over me. The silence was overwhelming, and every beat of my heart sounded too loud in my ears. But when I passed him, something unexpected happened. Without moving, without even looking at me directly, he murmured in a low, hoarse voice, "Stay away from that, Father. Berry, there are things that even God prefers not to be touched." My feet froze to the ground. The cold seemed to intensify, and the world around me shrank. How did he know my name? How did you know what I was investigating? I turned to face him, but he was already crossing the street, disappearing into the early morning fog like a figure. My entire body was shaking. This was no ordinary warning. Someone knew exactly what I was doing. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe someone had heard about my conversation with Father Samuel, but deep down I knew better. Whatever the inner circle was, they were paying attention, and now I was in their sights. That night was long. Sleep didn't come. The man's voice echoed in my mind like a persistent whisper. Every noise outside my room made my heart race, but I couldn't allow fear to dominate me. The next morning, I decided to continue with the investigation. I went to the Vatican Library, looking for hidden records, documents that had perhaps escaped censorship over the centuries. But as I walked through the halls of the old building, something inside me told me I wasn't alone. It was then that I noticed. One of the books I had left on the table the night before was out of place. Someone was there. Someone went through my belongings. My blood ran cold. I ran my eyes around, trying to find any clues. That's when I saw a small brown envelope folded carefully between the pages of a book that I didn't even remember opening. With trembling fingers, I pulled out the envelope and opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper. 3 words, written in firm, precise handwriting. "Stop before it's too late." My entire body went rigid. They were watching me. They were closer than I imagined, and now, more than ever, I knew I couldn't stop. My breathing was heavy, each step echoing in the silent halls of the Vatican Library. The note still burned in my hands. Those short, direct words burned into my mind. Stop before it's too late. Someone wanted to stop me. Someone knew I was getting too close, but I had already crossed a limit from which I could never return. It was no longer just about hidden documents or vague testimonies. I needed to see it with my own eyes. For days, I continued my investigation in silence, without attracting attention. Each conversation, each file, each fragment of information took me to the same point, an event that would happen soon, a ceremony restricted to a chosen few within the church. There were no official records nor public mentions of it, but the names I had already encountered, cardinals, bishops, even high-ranking figures, were all connected. The location also seemed shrouded in mystery. Everything indicated that it would take place in an underground chapel, a space that few knew existed within the Vatican's domains. I didn't have an invitation, but I had something even more valuable, the urgency of truth. That night, I put on a dark cassock and followed the ancient corridors, careful not to be seen. I had studied the map of the old buildings and knew that there were secret passages that would take me to the underground wing. One of them, forgotten in time, was hidden behind a marble statue of St. Michael the Archangel. With a careful push, I felt the mechanism give way and a crack open. The passage was narrow, damp, and the smell of mold and burning candles filled the air. Each step echoed through the tunnel, and darkness swallowed me as I descended the stone stairs. My heart hammered against my chest, but my mind was clear. I was about to discover the truth. After minutes that felt like hours, I reached the end of the tunnel. There was a heavy door, and behind it, voices whispered in a language I didn't fully understand. I pressed my ear against the wood and felt a shiver run down my spine. That wasn't Latin. It wasn't any prayer I knew. Carefully, I pushed the door open just enough to see. What I saw made me catch my breath. Inside, in the dim light of ancient chandeliers, a group of men were gathered in a circle. His robes were long, black, embroidered with symbols that I had seen before in ancient documents. In the center, a stone table, and on it, something that looked like an ancient artifact, covered by a dark cloth. One of the men raised his hands, and absolute silence filled the underground chapel. May the inner circle remain hidden, as it always has been. May your influence never be questioned. May secrets remain in the dark. My heart stopped. What I thought was just a conspiracy theory was right before my eyes. The church, which should be a refuge of light and truth, harbored something in the shadows, something that challenged everything I believed. And then it happened. One of the men turned his head slightly, and for a second I felt like he was looking right at me. My body froze. Had I been discovered? Adrenaline took over my body, and I knew I needed to get out of there before it was too late. But I couldn't run away, empty-handed. I needed proof, something that confirmed that what I had seen was not just a figment of my imagination. It was then that I saw a book on a pedestal next to the stone table. A thick, old book with yellowed pages and a leather cover marked by a symbol that I had already seen in the documents hidden in the confessional. That was the record of it all. If I could get my hands on that book, I would have the truth in my hands. But to do that, I would need to get even closer to the danger. Sweat was running down the back of my neck, my breathing was short, and my heart was hammering inside my chest as if to warn me of imminent danger. The vision of that group of men gathered in the underground of the church still burned in my mind. I had never felt something so visceral, so disturbing. I had the truth before me. I saw it with my own eyes. That ritual, the words murmured in a strange language, the symbols engraved on their clothes. None of that was part of Christian doctrine. None of that represented the teachings of Christ. This was proof that a powerful group operated in the shadows of the church, manipulating, controlling, ensuring that its dominance was never questioned. But what should I do with this information? If I revealed what I discovered, if I brought this to light, I knew the consequences would be devastating. They would come after me. This was not just a small group of deviant priests. This was something much bigger, something that had been perpetuated for centuries. I needed that book. He was the missing proof, the connecting thread that connected all the pieces I had put together so far. But how to get to it? How to catch it without being seen? My mind worked frantically, trying to find an opening, a chance to act. But before I could make a decision, something happened. One of the men, one of the ritual leaders, turned toward the door, and my body went rigid. For an instant, the feeling that he could see me went through my chest like a sharp blade. I remained still, holding my breath. He stared at the entrance for a few endless seconds before finally looking away. I needed to get out of there. The fear was overwhelming, but my determination was greater. Backing down at that moment meant losing the only chance I had of understanding what was really happening. But if I were caught, doubt consumed me. The dilemma between protecting my own life or exposing the truth. I thought about the faithful, the people who dedicated their lives to the church, believing they were serving something pure, something sacred. I thought about my own vocation, about the years I spent preparing to be a man of God, and now it all seemed tainted, distorted by something I could never imagine. But then another question plagued me. What if I wasn't the first to get here? If this information had been kept secret for so long, how many others before me had tried to do the same? How many had discovered too much and simply disappeared. I needed to be strategic. I couldn't act on impulse. I needed to find a way to expose this without my life becoming an immediate target. I backed away slowly, still not taking my eyes off the book on the pedestal. I couldn't take it now, not without being seen, but there was another way. I needed to go back. I needed to gather all the evidence I already had and understand what the next step would be. Every step I took away from that room felt like an eternity. The narrow corridor was colder than before, as if that underground chapel had sucked all the heat out of the room. When I finally emerged through the secret passage and returned to the quiet corridors of the Vatican, the air felt heavier. I knew my life would never be the same again. And now, I ask you, many people need to know about this. Share this video now. Don't let this secret remain buried. The more people know, the harder it will be for them to hide the truth. Share before it's too late. I left there with my heart racing, my mind spinning between the images I had just witnessed and the crushing doubt that weighed on me. What I had discovered was not just an empty conspiracy, nor a rumor whispered in the dark halls of the church. It was real. I saw, I heard, I felt the presence of that macabre truth hovering over me like a shadow impossible to ignore. But as scary as it was, that wasn't the end. It couldn't be. If that ceremony was just a fragment of what actually happened within the church walls, then what else was being hidden? What else operated in the shadows, protected by secret oaths and a network of influence so powerful that not even the popes seemed capable of dismantling? My head throbbed. My footsteps echoed through the empty hallways as I walked away from the hidden entrance to that forbidden underworld. The Vatican slept, but I knew that the darkness that crawled beneath its foundations never rested. My investigation was still far from over. Now that I had seen what really happened in the shadows, I couldn't just forget. I couldn't pretend that nothing happened. But with every second that passed, I felt something different. Something that wasn't there before. It was like I was marked. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe it was the adrenaline of the moment, the tension still pulsing through every fiber of my body. But something inside me said that from that moment on, I would never be alone again. They knew I was there, and I knew that meant the game had changed. I returned to my accommodation without looking around, without showing any sign that I was scared. If there were eyes watching me, and I was sure there were, I couldn't let them see my hesitation. He needed to act cautiously. When I entered my room, I locked the door and leaned against the wall, feeling my chest rise and fall rapidly. My cassock was stuck to my body with cold sweat. My mouth is dry, my thoughts are confused. I needed to organize everything. I needed to analyze every detail of what I had seen, every symbol, every phrase said in that ritual. I needed to understand the true purpose of that order. But before I could even begin to process everything, the unexpected happened. The sound came first, a subtle creak, a rustle of fabric, a slight shift of air. I turned around immediately, my breath catching in my throat. There was something there, or rather, somebody. My shadow flickered in the dim light of the candle burning on the nightstand, and behind her, another shadow moved. My blood ran cold. Someone was in my room, but I wasn't ready for what happened next. The truth was just the tip of the iceberg. If you've made it this far, it's because this story captured you as much as it captured me. And believe me, this is just the beginning. What comes next will completely change everything you think about the church and its darkest secrets. Then, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss the next episodes. Activate the bell to be the first to know when the sequel goes live. If this investigation gave you goosebumps, leave your like now so I know you want more revelations like this. And tell me in the comments, I saw the shadow. This way, I will know that you followed everything until the end and are ready to delve even deeper into this forbidden truth. Now, click on the next video that appears on your screen and continue this journey with me. What I discovered after that night was even more disturbing, and I'll tell you everything.